Hi, everyone. Today's episode of The High EQ Marketer is a masterclass in brand strategy. My guest, Gillian O'Connell, she leads brand and integrated marketing strategy for Microsoft's cajillion-dollar commercial business, which includes products like Azure, their cloud business, Dynamics, etc. In this conversation, I learned a lot about how to think about brand strategy, company brands, etc. And we also talked a bunch about the intersection of brand strategy and digital marketing. One of the cool things we talk about, sort of in the middle of the episode, is how your space and physical environment really matters for your brand. When I was at Amazon, I worked in a building called Wainwright, which I learned pretty early in my stint there that was the last name of Amazon's first customer, which when I learned that, I thought it was really cool, and it reinforced Amazon's brand focus on being customer-centric. Gillian has a lot of cool perspectives on this. Prior to Microsoft, she led the brand effort for Expedia's new Seattle campus. In this conversation, you'll also hear her insights on starting a career in brand strategy, and we talk about industries like professional services, hotels, auto, and more. I hope you enjoy it. Hi, Gillian. How are you? Welcome to the High
Hi,
EQ
John.
Marketer.
Thanks for having me.
We both started working a while ago. We don't need to give the specific year, but let's call it the late '90s. You were in the agency world for a few years, number of years, working on branding for massive brands. And what was brand marketing really like for companies like Pepsi or Ford or Deloitte? What were they really focused on before digital was a dominant theme?
Are you asking me back when everybody believed that the Earth was flat? How we thought about brand marketing? I think in many ways the fundamentals are the same. The fundamentals around you have to have a compelling story that you want to tell about your brand. You have to understand what makes you differentiated and unique, and you have to be emotional. And that remains true, kind of regardless of whether you go to market through print ads or digital. I would say there was certainly a time in the '90s where brand was considered to be the preeminent discipline in marketing, and I don't know if that's true anymore. I think there was certainly a time where we felt like the most important thing to do was figure out all of the different ways that we could connect with our customers, and so because we didn't have the straight connections that digital gives us today, we had to be a little more maybe creative in how we thought about those things. So certainly when I was in brand marketing in agencies in the '90s, one of the things we got excited about was brand scent as a concept. And so, not just what does the brand look like, not just how does the customer experience it, but actually what does it smell like when you walk into a bank. And so, yeah, it wasn't just for companies like Aveda, who probably do have a brand scent, but actually, corporate entities thinking about what does it smell like in my offices. And I think those days are probably gone. I think people now understand that perhaps we reach our customers in a more, I guess, direct is the right word. I think that what's exciting about digital, right, is that it allows us a much more direct connection with our customers, and we find them where they are. So I don't hear people talking about brand scent that much anymore as a concept.
I'd be interested to sit on the focus groups for that one. I mean, I can actually think about, like, if you walk into a Westin hotel, I feel like they have a scent, and Starbucks of course does. And if I take one of my kids to a fast food restaurant and then the other kid gets in the car, they know exactly which fast food restaurant I went to just because of the scent. But like, why do you think that well, it still is very important for some brands, clearly, but why do you think, what do you think that a brand was trying to connect with a consumer? Like, what would be the thinking between why the brand scent might be important for, like, a Bank of America?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I love that your kids have such good noses that they can tell the difference between McDonald's and Wendy's. But that's really what it's about.
Or maybe it's a reflection on my parenting. Who knows?
Isn't your wife a nutritionist?
Yeah, she is. I won't let her listen to this episode.
So I think I think the thinking behind brand scent is sound, actually, right? The thinking says when customers experience your brand, they experience it through all of the senses. You use visual identity to help people see, right? You see that big apple, you know what you're going to get. You design experiences that are both consistent and compelling. That's part of the art of branding. So I would say, you when you walk into a store, what it smells like is part of the experience. So I think Weston's a great example, of the consistent experience. That the Weston in Dallas and the Weston in Seattle smell exactly the same, and it I would say activates your senses to remember the experience that you had the last time you were in a Weston. And I laugh about scent because it sort of was part of a broader, slightly ridiculous perspective that we had on the importance of branding. But I do agree that scent is a really powerful, neurological force to help you form and generate memory. And so yeah, you walk into the West and you think, okay, I know what I'm going to get from an experiential perspective. And I think the other thing to say is brands work really, like, the job of a brand is both to tell a story that's compelling, but also to create consistency over time, to set an expectation for you. So the more consistent you can be in the experience you create, whether it's good or bad is a different question, but the more consistency that you can create over time, the stronger your brand will be, because people will really understand what you stand for. Does that make sense?
That makes a
Okay,
lot of
great.
sense. And when it comes to when it comes to Weston, I can see how that works for a different kind of company like Ford or Pepsi or a consulting agency. Do those things still apply? Take me through how brand might work in a different sense other than travel or quick service
Yeah, okay. Well,
restaurants.
so I spent a lot of my early career doing branding in professional services. So Deloitte, did some work even for McKinsey, for PwC, Arthur Anderson back in the day, when the pre Enron universe, and that's a really different kind of branding, right? Because those guys go to market with professionals who have a service that they are selling and marketing, and the individuals involved in that are very powerful in terms of what, the relationship that you create with customers, right? You have a relationship with a partner at PwC, and that's really what helps you decide what you want to buy from them and what the quality of the relationship is. So it's a very different kind of brand challenge, where the brand itself is not really driving the relationship. The individuals are driving the relationship. And so the job of brand and professional services is much more about equipping those professionals with the right stories and the right tools, as opposed to directly telling the stories to the end customer. And interesting, I would say one of the things that happened in professional services branding all the time, that I always found fascinating, was the the people that we were working with, right, the head of accounting, or the head of tax, would say it's really important that my brand is differentiated. And we'd say, yeah, great. This is what Deloitte's doing. This is what PwC is doing. This is what Arthur Andersen. And they'd be like, no, no, no. I need my brand to be differentiated from accounting within Arthur Andersen, because I'm actually the tax professional and I need it to be different. And I was like, no, 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 no. That's not how it works. What you want to do is you want to use branding to tell an all-up story about what makes your whole offer unique, not what makes you different from tax or accounting within the organization. And that was a consistent challenge for us as we started to design brand architecture for these companies, to say I don't do a different look and feel for tax than I do for accounting. You're trying to create an all-up consistent relationship with the master brand, the company brand, I should say. Sorry, we don't say master brand anymore. You got to cut that out. The company brand.
Oh,
We can
okay.
talk about that if you want
All
to,
right.
actually. But we master brand was a term that we used in the last century, which is obviously considered to be not inclusive anymore. So we tend to say company brand or corporate brand now.
All right. Right on. That makes sense. I can kind of empathize with what the tax leader was saying, just from the sense of I run the sports car division of Ford, and I want to have a slightly different perspective than the F-100, the truck, the
Yeah.
truck leader. How does something like that work? How do you think about something like that as a company
Yeah, I
brand
love
leader?
that question because what you're asking about, right, is the sort of art and craft of brand architecture. How do you put together sets of brands that make sense under a company brand that has a specific job to do? And so I would say one of the things that we always think about in branding, and this is true. I'm at Microsoft currently. This is a conversation that we have all the time. Is something sufficiently different from the core of what the business is trying to create that it's really worth creating a new brand for it? Because as you know, creating a new brand is both expensive and it has impact kind of reputationally on the organization all up. So the general stance is a single brand is easier to manage. It makes more sense from a customer perspective. But sometimes you look at your product offering and you say, okay, that offering is not is doesn't fit into the brand sets that we have today, and so we really do have to go and create a new brand for it. So in the world of professional services, we did really ask ourselves whether do you get more value from a single brand like a Deloitte, or does it make more sense for tax to be a completely separate brand that shows up with a completely different perspective? Those are business decisions that you make, right? The brand itself is ultimately has to serve the business. The job of the brand is to tell the story that the business wants to tell, and so you have to decide whether you think that one big brand where you have to do more explanation at the lower level is more important versus two brands that you have to invest in separately. And again, that's really those are business decisions that you make through really thinking about what your brand architecture is and how your customers perceive you.
That makes a ton of sense. When you and I were chatting a couple weeks ago, we were reflecting on the fact that I don't know exactly when it started, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and there are still countless amazing brand people, brand agencies, but we felt like there was a bit of a brain drain from agencies to brands for brand work, especially I think, and maybe this is just my story, that it was for people with experience with digital. Why do you think that was? And do you think it had to do with digital transformation, something else, just a trend?
Think I don't know that I have any profound insight as to why that brain drain happened. I think it's maybe a natural. I think maybe it's a natural thing that happens when innovation and new ideas become more embedded in organizations, right? So brand in the last century was a new idea for organizations in terms of actively managing it and understanding it. And I think organizations realized that they needed help to do that, and they turned to outside experts to do that. So those agencies in those days had a lot of sway over the marketing department. We had a lot of conversations with CEOs. We were in at that level because people needed our expertise to understand, how we go to market. Some of the things we've talked about brand architecture, about brand strategy, about how we create experience for customers, about how we count that, how we think about our ROI for those things. And I think as we evolved the discipline of branding, I think companies became clear that, this isn't going away. We need this, and so they started creating in-house departments. We saw way more design moving in-house. When I worked at PepsiCo, they moved tons of design in-house. They have a huge design studio. Starbucks is the same. They have a big design studio, and same in Microsoft, right? I part of what I do is run the design studio there, and so that expertise became clear that we needed to have it as an organization from a corporate perspective, and so I think companies built the skill themselves in house to do that. And I can only say that was my personal career trajectory, right? I started out in the agency world, but found that the opportunity to build brand within a company was more compelling from a career perspective for me.
Yeah, we're trying to incubate some brands internally. And some we're partnering with great agencies on. I'd love to ask the question. Probably a bunch of people are asking the same thing that I am, which is, what's the first question you should be asking? I know that when I spent my time in product management, the foundational question is, what are we solving for? And I oftentimes, when thinking about brand, I know I'm going down the wrong path here, but I'm like, does the name need to change? What's wrong with the logo? Thinking very tactically. For someone thinking about like reinventing their brand, how does one come to that conclusion?
Yeah. Well, so I think I don't know if your question is about new brands or brand reinvention. If the question is about new brands, the first question is, do I really need a new brand? And I think it's very, very tempting in organizations to say, yeah, new brand, it's beautiful, it's different, no one's ever done anything like this before. But to what we were talking earlier about brand equity and brand architecture, you really have to think about whether you need to create a new brand or whether the brand that you have today can stretch to do a different job. So I think that's sort of the first question is a new brand really needed for what you're doing, or do you have an existing brand in your portfolio or in your company that allows you to go to market and doesn't require you to invest in a new brand? And then I think assuming that you decide, yes, I do need a brand, I do need to build a brand, or I do need to reinvent an existing brand, I think the fundamental question is, what is the job of the brand? When I was at Wolf Olins, which is a brand agency in New York and London, we used to ask the question, brand to do what? And for me, I think you have to start with understanding the brand as a tool of the business. And so you've got to figure out what it is you want it to do. And I think it's not always the same, right? At Microsoft, where I am currently, the company brand does a really specific, amazing job for us, right? The company brand talks about scale, it talks about purpose, it talks about security. When you think about Microsoft, the company brand does a lot of lifting for us in the organization. And so then when I have to say, okay, I need to create a product brand underneath that's Microsoft Azure or Microsoft Viva or Microsoft Dynamics, what is it that those brands have to do that's different from the job that the company brand does? They don't have to deliver the ideas of purpose and scale because we get that halo from the corporate brand. So now the question is, what does our audience need to understand about us that's differentiated and that's compelling and that's true? And those are the three things. Like that's the simplest Venn diagram of brand, is differentiated, compelling, and true. And if you can find something that's at the heart and soul of those things, then the brand has done its job.
Those things we've been talking a lot about. I love how you're framing this up. We've been talking a lot about how brands connect with existing customers, future customers, loyal customers. But what applies and doesn't apply to someone working at Microsoft or wherever? I found your work at Expedia incredibly interesting. I'd love you to talk about that if you don't mind, where you focused a lot on the space and physical environment within the office. Can you tell me about your experience there and what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, thank you. And it's a great question because right, we certainly, brand marketers tend to think about what are we doing? How are we acquiring customers? How does it matter? But there's a hugely important part of the job of the brand, which is to attract and retain employees. I mean, particularly at the moment, people are, as you know, there's a lot of movement in the job market at the moment, and so it's super important that your company brand, your corporate brand, is telling the story that you want to tell, both externally and internally, to attract and retain talent. So yeah, so when I was at Expedia Group, really my job was to head up the corporate brand globally. So tell the story of the Expedia Group brand, not the individual brands that we use to acquire customers like Vrbo, Hotels.com, Expedia itself, but actually the company level brand, which was the place where you went to work every day and got your paycheck from. And so lots of different aspects of that. Some strategic, where we had to say, what makes us, like, why would you want to come to work at Expedia Group, right? So the really core fundamental of like, what is so special about us as an organization? And when I was there, we really tried to simplify the story we were telling around, both purpose and business values. So the purpose part of the story is travel is a force for good. Like, we really believe at Expedia that travel changes the world in positive ways, both for people traveling, like we go on vacation together and it makes our family stronger, but also for the communities that we support. So having hotels in all over the world creates enormous amounts of revenue, right? And an opportunity for people in those worlds. And so it's super important that we think about travel in that way. And that was not a new concept, but I think something that we really codified through the brand thinking that we did. And then of course the business value, like what is special about Expedia, what makes Expedia an amazing place to work is because it does have that scale, it does have the relationships, it does have a place where you can come and grow your career. And so both of those things were important in telling the brand story. And so when we focused on building our new campus in Seattle, one of the things we really wanted to think about was how did we tell the story of travel and how it's a force for good in the world. And so traditionally, I think when in travel companies you'll walk in and there'll be a big picture of a beach, and there's a lovely there's toes, right? There's always toes and water in the background, and there's sort of like destinations are cool, and that had been the way that we had celebrated travel in our office. And I had an amazing partner who was our head of real estate at Expedia, and we really wanted to work to do something a little bit more interesting around how did we actually tell that story in our spaces. So one of the things that we did was we created these enormous murals that felt like they were replicating the experience of traveling rather than necessarily the destination. So these gorgeous cityscapes are beautiful. We had kind of a 4-story stairwell, and we had these amazing visuals of forest and trees, and they were more about kind of what does it feel like to travel, and what are the destinations that we want to celebrate. We created a food hall that felt like a bazaar, like this amazing experience where you can get sushi over here and you can get Indian food over here. And Microsoft does that too, right? You go into the Microsoft cafeteria and like there's Indian food and there's Chinese food. There's not, it's those different types of foods are there, but the experience made it feel like, oh, you're really somewhere beautiful. We spent time investing in the environment and the people who showed up and the training that we gave them. And so we're trying to create more of a sort of an experience of the value of travel through the everyday experiences that employees have.
It feels like those little things really do matter. You and I worked together at Amazon, and I believe the building we worked at was called Wainwright, and it might have been Amazon's first building. I'm not totally sure. And why was it Wainwright? That was the last name of Amazon's first customer.
That's right.
And when you learn that, you're like, wow, that's like really cool. And it's a way of reinforcing being about the customer. And I also remember this experience I had early in my career where I was in an office building, and it was like I was going to a place like across the hall from where the Boston Celtics had some kind of office or whatever, and it had like the parquet floor. What was the floor? Like the Boston Gardens floor was the floor. There were like pictures of Larry Bird and stuff like that. And I was like, oh my gosh, like why can't I have a career in basketball? So, yeah, I think it really matters. How do you try to measure that? By the way, I'm sure if an HR professional is listening to this, they're trying to like fit this into a KPI. Can you measure success of that stuff?
Let's come back to measurement. I did want to say one other thing about physical environment, because I think what you described, right, what the Celtics showed in their office, like what you put in your spaces shows what you value, and if you have clarity about what your brand is, then your values will show up in those physical spaces. And I'm sure you have seen, as everybody has, a story on LinkedIn about the Ukrainian president and what he said when he was elected. He said, don't put photos of me in your offices. I don't want to be some kind of dictatorial leader. Put photos of your children in your offices so you understand what we're working for. And I've paraphrased him, but I thought it was a beautiful example of what you put in your physical spaces really does demonstrate what you find valuable. And so I thought that was a really powerful message. And I think, brand is not achieving what he's achieving, but it's the same concept that you demonstrate what you value every day when people walk into your offices, and it is really meaningful in the experience.
That's a really great example.
So you asked about measurement, which is brand people hate it when you use phrases like ROI and KPIs. I would say the measurements are tend to be more qualitative than quantitative, and I think it's an interesting evolution that I see in the profession towards figuring out ways that we can be more quantitative in how we measure the impact of branding. I sit in Microsoft within what we call the Global Demand Center, which is really about connecting sales and marketing, and so we have a lot of KPIs around the more traditional kind of digital marketing, how we capture leads. But we still really don't have great KPIs around branding. I would say if you are an HR professional, you think about it in terms of talent retained and talent acquired, and those are the metrics. And that's super difficult to say brand is the only thing that does that, right? Because of course there's so many more factors around how people make those decisions. So I think it's difficult, is the answer to your question. I think one of the things we do really well at Microsoft is brand trackers over time. So one of the things we do, and most companies do, is you do these tracking surveys where you talk to customers every 3 months or 6 months, and you can get a ping on what's happening with your brand, and then you have specific perceptions you're trying to understand, right? Do people think our brand is, you have a list of things that you care about. Do people think our brand is differentiated, is meaningful, tells the stories we want it to tell? And you can tell over time that the work that you're doing, but it is a long haul commitment to measurement, which is a little bit different, I think, to what we see in sort of short term digital marketing today. So it's a really interesting area, and I don't know that in my universe we've cracked it yet.
Well, it feels to me like digital marketing has all these benefits to it in terms of short-term measurement and ROI, but sometimes you lose a connection to what the brand's overall achieving, and your overall results go down over time through like relentless optimization that might take you away from your core brand tenets. And then brand marketing has kind of the opposite challenge. So the companies that are really killing it are kind of doing both well, and they're informing each other. How do you connect with digital marketing teams and like beyond here's our style guide.
Yeah.
Like how do you connect to overcome obstacles or take advantage of opportunities in the market?
Yeah, I think what you're talking about here is for me, I think the heart and soul of the future of marketing, because I think you're right. Like, digital marketing has figured out how to optimize in any individual moment. This ad works harder than this ad, we know that. But the ad that works harder isn't always the ad that's going to be building your brand. And so that's the trade-off of that optimization creates, is that sometimes the stories that we really want to tell don't get told. And so, first of all, that's a good thing that we learn that the story that we want to tell isn't most compelling. So that's a huge part of what digital marketing brings back to the brand, is to say, yeah, you think people care about your amazing record in sustainability, they care about the price of the offer, whatever it is, right? You get a ton of input from how those optimizations work. That's really interesting. So to answer your question, part of my job is to listen to what's working creatively and bring it back in and say, yeah, does that reshape what we're trying to do from a brand perspective? And then the other part of it is to defend what we really truly believe is core to the brand, and make sure that we are creating opportunities for us outside the traditional digital media, that we're counting things in a different way, and that we make sure that we show up in the places that we need to show up in, even if they're not the most effective from a media perspective. And that comes back to strong marketing strategy. That comes back to understanding where in the funnel you are in the relationship with your customers. It's about understanding who are the customers we really need to acquire, and what is it that they care about. And so you can bifurcate a little bit how you think about the strategic brand storytelling from the individual instances of the digital marketing that you do. I think.
I totally agree what you're saying about
John. I think
about the about the future of marketing. And you mentioned this, but you lead brand and integrated marketing for Microsoft's commercial business. I'd like to talk about kind of the brand marketing profession, and I know you're hiring. Like what do you look for in a brand marketer? Because it's not necessarily the same thing you're looking for a paid search practitioner.
Yeah.
And maybe if I could add on kind of a second layer to the question, how does someone get started in brand marketing if that's what sounds interesting to them?
Yeah. So I would draw a distinction between brand marketing and brand strategy. So what sits on my team is actually brand strategy. It's the really core storytelling, the who are we, what is it that we do that's uniquely us, and how do we create the fundamentals of the brand that don't change too much over time. Brand marketing is more the activity then of bringing that to market and telling that story. And they are really distinct disciplines. Lots and lots of people who are brilliant brand marketers don't have the skill to do brand strategy, and vice versa. So I think that's the first thing to say is for what I'm looking for, what I'm hiring against at the moment is somebody who really can strategically understand what a market needs, can listen to can ingest lots and lots of research and content and understand what it is that's going on from a customer perspective, understand what the company offers and what's really unique about what's happening from a company perspective, and then put those together in a different way than is logical. So there's lots of logical input, and then there's sort of a creative leap towards, okay, that's all very interesting, but there's a story that we need to tell, and that's the sort of creative leap that a great brand strategist can do. And it's I used to work with a woman who used to describe it as you have to have that the beautiful mind where you can see all the pieces of it, and then suddenly it all comes together, and you can make sense of it. And that's how I always visualize like really great brand strategists and how they do their work. How do you get started?
You're talking about the Russell Crowe meme? Is that the one?
Do you remember that movie?
Okay, yeah.
Where you can see all the math, you can see all the science, you can see all the thinking, you can see all the kind of logic that underlies. You have to understand business. You do have to have the business logic that underlies, but then you can make a leap from it towards something that feels like a unique or a fresh or a new story. And it is. So it's an unusual kind of a person who's a great brand strategist. And I think to answer your question, how you get started, I would say start in an agency. Brand agencies, creative agencies, those are great places to cut your teeth, because you have an opportunity to work on lots and lots of different kinds of brands, and so you can see the different kinds of jobs that brands have to do, and you get to learn kind of the methodologies and the approach. So I think it's certainly in-house from a perspective of what we look for. I love to see people who have that experience in brand agencies, because I think it really broadens people's skill sets.
Thanks, Gillian. Thanks for the conversation. Great to see you.
Thanks, John. It was great to see you.